Some animals are born with a genetic plan for life. Their genes provide most of the behavior instructions that they need for life, and unlike those animals, humans learn from experience. Humans learn new behaviors, they are able to get through changing circumstances, and it is one of the nature gift to humans, which is called as adaptability. So our today's topic learning is the process of acquiring new and relatively enduring information or behavior. And how do we learn? The answer is quite simple. We learn through association. Now, associative learning is the certain events occurring together. The events may be two stimuli or a response and its consequences. Now, there are two main forms of associative learning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So, learning that occurs when two stimuli are paired, a response which is at first dictated by the second stimulus is eventually dictated by the first stimulus alone. Today, most psychologists agree that classical conditioning as the basic form of learning by which all organisms adapt to their environment. Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov, known primarily for his work in classical conditioning, carried out an experimental investigation which became a solid foundation for future science of psychology. So even Pavlov explored that whenever food is presented to the dog started salivating. Thus, an unconditioned stimulus produced an unconditioned response. Before conditioning, he presented neutral stimulus, a tone which didn't produce salvation response. Pavlov started to present a neutral stimulus, a tone, just before an unconditioned stimulus. Neutral stimulus then became a conditioned stimulus, producing a conditioned response. Watson followed Pavlov's idea and did an experiment with 11-month-old little Albert, which is very unethical. Albert feared loud noises, but not the white rat. Watson started to present white rat neutral stimulus just before an unconditioned stimuli loud noises, and he noticed that Albert started fearing rats. Now the neutral stimuli became a conditioned stimulus, which produced a conditioned response. Neutral stimulus, unconditioned response, unconditioned stimulus, conditioned response, and conditioned stimulus are the basic components of classical conditioning. Neutral stimulus is a stimulus that elicits no response before conditioning, and an unconditioned response is naturally occurring response to an unconditioned stimuli. An unconditioned stimulus is a stimulus that unconditionally, naturally, and automatically triggers a response, whereas conditioned stimuli is an originally irrelevant stimuli that after association with an unconditioned stimulus comes to trigger our conditioned response, whereas conditioned response is a learned response to a previously neutral stimulus. Now we will look at the behaviorism view of learning. Behaviorism is a learning theory that only focuses on objectively observable behavior. There are five major conditioning processes: acquisition, extinction, spontaneous recovery, generalization, and discrimination. Acquisition usually refers to the first stage of learning when a response is established. Even Pavlov figured that representing neutral stimulus half a second earlier than unconditioned stimulus usually works well. They said that when neutral stimulus follow unconditioned stimulus, conditioning does not happen. Hence, unconditioned stimulus must follow neutral stimulus. However, we can make a new neutral stimulus, a new conditioned stimulus, process known as higher order conditioning or second order conditioning, but it is weaker than the first order conditioning. Now, have you ever imagined what would happen if the conditioned stimulus occurred repeatedly without the unconditioned stimuli? If the tone sounded again and again, but no food appeared, would the tone still trigger salvation? The answer was mixed. The dog salivated less and less, and a reaction known as extinction. Extinction is the diminished responding that occurs when the conditioned stimulus no longer signals an impending unconditional stimulus, for example, food. Now, here's a graph that suggested Pavlov that extinction was suppressing the conditioned response rather than eliminating it. Now we take an example. Toddlers are taught to fear moving cars, but they also become afraid of moving trucks and motorcycles. So this tendency to respond likewise to stimuli similar to the conditioned stimuli is called generalization. Now, other sounds were presented to the dog, but the dog only responded to the particular tone. So this learned ability to distinguish between a conditioned stimuli, which predicts the unconditioned stimuli, and other irrelevant stimuli is called discrimination. And why Pavlov work is so important today? Well, Pavlov work taught us that all organisms learn to adapt to their environment through classical conditioning. He showed us that learning can be studied objectively without any subjective judgments.